Hello, so in this tutorial we are going to attempt to make a somewhat player counter stroke round based user interface monitor so that we can see how many lives a player has left as well as how many lives an enemy has left, and we're also going to have a timer on it so that we can see how long of the game is left or how long the round is left. So then in Unity I have 3 folders currently. One scripts folder, one scenes folder, and one graphics folder. And in the graphics folder I have 4 images. They're all sprites, as you can see here in the inspector. And 2 of these images is for the player, 2 is for the enemy. And each image has one where it's lit up and another where it's basically darkened out. So I've just given it an outline so we can keep it on the user interface, but we can just indicate that the player has lost a life, so to speak. So first off, if we create a canvas, just right click in the hierarchy, user interface and canvas, and on the right hand side here, this I feel is kind of important. If we change the constant pixel size to scale with screen size, set the X to 1920 and the Y to 1080, and then this match slider here, assign that to 0.5. And you won't notice anything here in the actual scene bit, but that will basically make it so that the screen, well, the user interface will scale pretty well for any device size or resolution of screen and so on. So it's a pretty good thing to try and keep your canvas at these settings like whenever you can, basically, unless you're doing something very specific. Now within the canvas, if you right click and then add a text element, this is going to be for our timer. And then in the text section on the right, just type in 60 for 60 seconds. And up here in the rect transform component, if we assign this to the very top here with this one, this will basically ensure that our timer will always be at the very top of the screen. So even if we had a massive resolution or a tiny resolution, it knows roughly where it needs to be. Now, obviously, it hasn't moved here. So then in the position here, we're just going to set the width to 200. And set the Y to -30. And then if we just come back here down to the text, we just change it to italic and then to 30 in size. And then what we can do is just over here, if we just zoom in, you'll see we don't see any text. But then if you just drag this down a little, the text will appear. Actually, let's make this 40 in size. And then drag this down. And then we center it and then middle align. And then that'll put it right in the center for us. Now, if we just press play, it'll take us to the game screen, but obviously we're not going to see much because obviously I don't have anything. But as you can see, 60 right in the center, awesome. So now if we go back into the canvas and then we just create an image, and then in this we can just drag one of our empty lights into the sprite section over here on the right, and then if we can just move this up to the top of the screen, and then to the left. And now same again, we're going to assign it to the very top and then just drag it in a little. So we just make this -120 for now, just to see how that looks. And then we might actually need to make this a little bit smaller, I think. Let's see how it looks. That's a bit big. Okay, so if we just change the width and the height here to, let's say, 70 perhaps, and then play again. Yeah, it's a pretty good size. So if we just duplicate this image here and then duplicate it again, and that'll give us our 3 images, but now we'll need to move this one to the left slightly. So if we just double how far it is to the left by making this 240, and then make this one -360, and then obviously you've got your 3 counters, but the gap there is kind of big, so we can probably take this middle one and move it in a little to there, so that's -200, and then do this third one like so, and that'll be -280. Yep, -280 seems right. Cool. So I personally then would bring this text down a little and maybe make the text a little bit bigger, because obviously it's pretty small and there's not much user interface there. So make this 50, and then cool, that's looking good. And then if we just take these 3 images, duplicate all of them, and then we can drag in the pink holder for those, and then we can just move the full thing to the right and then just align that again. So we know the first image here is minus 120 away from the very central point. So if we take this one here, we just make it plus 120, and then the next one would be plus 200, and then finally the third one would be plus 280. I think I've said this before, so I'm a big fan of naming everything pretty specific as to what I need it to do. So if we call this player icon 1, and then the next one player icon 2, and then the final one player icon 3, and then alternatively if we take the first one on the right hand side and we call this enemy icon 1, wait, let me just, yeah, that's correct, and then the next one be enemy icon 2, and finally enemy icon 3. Obviously you can call this whatever you want, it's not going to make a difference. And then we just call this timer text. And mostly that is the user interface kind of done. You know, it doesn't get much more complicated than that. So now what I want to do first is get the timer working. The timer is pretty easy to do. So if we go into scripts and create a new timer, and we call C# script, and if we call this, oh, my mistake. And we just call this timer manager script, and then we just attach this to our timer and just drag it in at the bottom here, and then within that we'll just make a quick bit of code that will just run the timer down continuously, as well as provide feedback to the user interface at some point. So if we just start by declaring a variable called time, so float time, end time, actually, yeah, there we go, float time, and then within here, actually no, it makes better sense to call it here public, and we call this start time. Actually, it makes more sense, because what we'll do is we'll make it public variable so that then we can adjust the time as we need to. So if we want the round to be 2 minutes or 10 minutes, we can do that pretty easily. And then within update, we're just going to do a very simple trick, which is start time minus equals time.delta time, and then not sure if we need that. No, we don't. There we go. Now, in a sense, what that does is this bit here will get the time per frame, which by some magic, when you add delta time to it, is 1 second, pretty much. So then if we know our float is, let's say, 60, start time is always going to be whatever my time is minus equals time.delta time, which is, we know is 1 second, give or take a few milliseconds. So then start time, every update that gets run, which is once per frame, as you can see here, it will reduce the start time by 1 every second, in short. And what we want to do then is check to see if start time is less than or equal to 0.0f, and then print end game. Now obviously that's not going to do much apart from just let us know that the game has ended. So if we save that and then we go back to Unity, and then down here you'll see that our start time section has appeared, and we can just put 60 seconds in there, and that is awesome. And then that will work, but nothing will happen because we haven't hooked it up to the user interface yet. So as I've explained many times before, I try to keep my code as separate as possible. So someone told me once that I should keep all the user interface stuff in one place and only ever read from let's say the brain of the game manager, or whatever you want to call it. Read the information from that, but never write to it with the user interface, of course. So what we'll do now is create another script, and we will call this let's say user interface manager, and then drag that to our canvas, and then that is that done. So if we edit this now, And the first thing we want to do is add the namespace to the top of the document and call that using unityengine.ui. And that will just allow us to use all the user interface components that Unity has built into the scripts, in a sense. So up here, first off, what we'll do is we'll make a public text, and we will call this timer text UI. And that will allow us then to reference our text at the top of the page. We don't need to start because we're never ever going to be adjusting that. And then in the update, we just want to do timer text UI dot get component timer manager script dot. We haven't written this function yet, so it won't really work correctly. But if we do get current time, open bracket, close bracket, and end the line, this will basically try and access this text field, get the component timer manager script, and then get the current time. Now if we go back to the time manager script and we create a new function, public float, actually public float, get what I call get current time, and then return start time. Actually, that's wrong. We actually need a current time field, don't we? So sorry, if I just put this void start back in, and then we have a float called current time, and then current time equals start time. Now basically every time the game starts, it will set the current time to whatever start time you've given it within Unity here. So now if we go back to this, we want to change this to current time minus equals time dot delta time, and change this to current time is less than 0, because we never need to know what the start time was when we're actually playing, because it could be 2 minutes, it could be 30 seconds, could be 10 seconds, but what we only care about is the current time, which is getting adjusted constantly. And at the start of the game, it's going to be equal to the start time, and as we're playing through the game, it's going to constantly get reduced. So then up here, we want to return the current time. So anything that asks the timer manager for the current time, it will return the current time, not the start time. And then if we go back here, I just realized I made a mistake here too. Call this game object instead of timer text. Instead of text, sorry, not timer text. And then, as you notice now, the red line is gone from here, so that whenever we update, it will reference that. So now in here, if we do timer text UI dot get component text dot text equals there we go. Made another mistake. Shouldn't be recording this at night, I think. So what we can actually do, which makes a lot more sense, is just call this text here. We don't need to reference that. Well, actually, undo that. If we just copy this full line, which makes a bit more sense, change this to text dot text. Ooh. Dot text equals, paste the line we just copied, and what you can do, this is a very sneaky way of doing things. Oh. That will, in sense, allow you to have your number appear within a text field. That's not the right way of doing it, though. That's just a way of tricking the system. But if we do, I believe it is .toString. That does the exact same thing, but apparently toString keeps it very low on memory. It's not going to make a difference with what we're doing, but if you're making a much bigger game, let's say World of Warcraft for instance, doing it this way is going to be a lot better for the system compared to doing it the way I just showed you, which is something I've actually seen and done myself in the past, so it's kind of a big thing to learn, I think. So if we save both of these, if everything's mostly correct, should be fine over here. And then back in Unity, if we go back to our canvas, you can see that it's asking for the timer text UI now. So if we just drag our timer text into that, and then press play with a bit of luck. Now, as you can see, the time is counting down, but obviously we can see everything. So what we want to do now is format it to only see the decimal places, if you like. So I think if we go back to here and we change it to string in quotes 0, I believe may work. File save all. And there we go. So now that's the timer working. We can change this anytime you want. You know, it's if we just stop that and go back to the timer text, we can change this to 30. And there we go. It starts from 30 seconds. It does make a difference. The only issue you'll have though, if you set it to 61, because it's not an actual timer formatted, it will start from literally 61 seconds, but not count down in minutes. So it's kind of a bummer. But since when we discussed 60 seconds, there you have it. So what we do is unplay that, and we'll go back to 60 seconds start time. So if we just save this now, save scenes into the scenes folder, test scene, and then, well, that's the timer pretty much done and dusted already. So what we will do now is if we start getting this player counter working, so if we go back into the user interface manager, which is here, and now we will actually make use of the sprites. So if we make a public sprite player icon, actually make it player icon A, and then public sprite player icon B. In the comments, we'll just make sure this clears up. So player icon A will be, let's say, active icons, and inactive icons. So the A we will have as there's a life there, and B there's not. And then public game object. What we can actually do here is something pretty cool, if I remember how to do it correctly. If we call this public game object player icons. Now actually this is probably going a bit too complicated. So if we just call this player public game object player icon 1, and then we do this for all three. To public game object player icon 3, and then we need to keep a track of how many lives they've got. So we'll call this int player lives, and then we need our start function back. And then in here we'll just set player lives to 3. As we discussed, it's never going to be more than 3, it's never going to be less, so it's pointless trying to overcomplicate the entire system when we know exactly how it's going to work. So then in here then, yeah, so if we just save this for now, and then we go back to Unity. In the canvas, all this will update again. So now as you can see, we've got player icon A, player icon B, and the 3 different player icons. So let's drag the 3 player icons in. 1, 2, 3, and then we've got the 2 icons here. We know what they're going to be because they're in our graphics. So if we go back, and so player active A was the active one, and player icon B was the inactive one. So that's all that kind of taken care of. So what we want to do now is that every time the player loses a life, basically, we'll update the UI and get that UI to basically assign whatever images need to be assigned. So in here, if we just make a simple key press, so if input.get key, get key is probably fine, yeah. Key code dot, let's call this one P for player. So every time we press P, we want to do player lives minus minus. So it'll reduce by 1. That is pretty much, you know, the basic concept of every time the player loses a life, we will trigger this script. So then if we come up here, so int player current lives, probably want to do it that way because obviously we need to keep the current lives and the max player lives two different variables, otherwise things might get confusing. So player current lives equals player current lives equals player lives. So that will basically, player lives get set to 3, player current lives is equal to the player lives. So if player lives was 5 at the start, player current lives would start with 5 lives. And then when we press P, we want to reduce the current lives, not the actual starting lives. And if player current lives is less than or equal to 0, we will again print end game, because basically that's what we want to do. Maybe even just specify end game, player out of lives. And while we're here, we may as well just do, actually, nope, scrap that, getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, so save that. And then if we, yeah, actually, it might be worth doing that, actually. So print player lost their life. There we go. So every time we press P, we should be able to see in the console something come up saying we've lost a life. So if we press play, and when we press P, down in the bottom left hand corner, end game, player out of lives. Which seems pretty quick, because obviously we've only pressed it once, and we know for a fact they start with 3 lives. And that'll probably be because input.getKey is basically whenever a key is being held down or pressed. So if we change this to get key up, it will only trigger when the key gets released, no other time. So if we press again, and press P, player lost a life, press P again, player lost a life, press P again, the player's out of lives because he's lost all 3 lives. So cool, that's that pretty much working. So what we need to do now is update it so that every time a player loses a life, we will trigger the script to adjust the images. So if we just create a new function and call it public void player lost life. And then within this, basically what we're going to do is, with these images here and these game objects, we know how many lives there are. We just basically need to assign the new icon to the image. So if we, yeah, so if we reference player icon, well, actually, if player icon 3, no, sorry, we need to check the number of lives first. So player, if player current lives is equal to 3, then we actually, no, we will call it afterwards. So if player current lives is equal to 2, then the third icon, player icon 3, is dot get component image dot sprite equals player icon B. Now, basically, what that does is it'll say, so for player icon 3, which is this one, want to get the component image, which is this here, anything within this, and then we want to get the sprite, which is the actual source image here. And then I want to assign it to player icon B wherever player icon B is. So then we can just do the same. So if player current lives is equal to 1, player icon 2 dot get component image dot sprite equals player icon B. And then we do the same thing for the final one. If player current lives is equal to 0, player icon 1 dot get component image dot sprite equals player icon B. Now, one thing I just realized is that you start out with 3 lives. So let's say you fall off and you die, and then you've got 2 lives, and you fall off and die again, and you're left with 1. This will work, but the way it should be working is that here I think we need to remove this equal sign, otherwise it's just going to get a bit crazy. So if we file, save all that, and then what we actually need to do is come here and change these 3 player icons to this full one, because we want it to start with lives, not without them. So I'm not entirely sure this is going to work first time, so this will be interesting. But if we play and then press P, no, it's not, because we haven't hooked it up. So obviously we've made this function, but it doesn't know when to run. So if we then just plonk it in here after the if statement, and we do player lost life end line, file, save all again, go. That's the error gone. And we try again. So that's after pressing it once. That's after pressing it twice. And that's your third time. And then the next time you die, end game, player out of lives. So that's pretty much how you want it to run, I think. So now we just basically need to do the exact same thing, but for the other side. So if we just do, well, in fact, we can just probably copy this and just change these player to enemy. And then down here we need to do the exact same thing. So enemy lives equals 3, player current lives equals enemy lives. And then in the update function, we're going to create another if statement. So if input.getKeyUp keycode dot, because it's an enemy this time, we're just going to do E. And then we'll do enemy current lives minus minus. Print enemy lost alive. And then again, we need to make sure that if the enemy gets to 0, we need to end the game. So here we're just going to copy and paste that, change this to enemy, end game, enemy out of lives. And then within that same if statement, enemy lost life. Because we don't really know how many lives they've got left, so we want it on the outside, and then it'll run every time the key is pressed or the enemy falls off, or so on, so on, so on. Actually, you might be better off just copying this function too. Save you writing it all out. And then we just, again, we need to change all this to enemy. Enemy lost life. A lot of enemies, huh? What's wrong? What's wrong? Enemy current lives. Ah, needs to be lowercase. Smooth. So now, if we save that again, now if we go back to Unity, all these variables are new. So in the user interface manager, we're gonna have all these pop back up. So I'm forgetting something. We need our new sprites too, because our enemies are going to be using different sprites. So if we do public sprite enemy icon A, and we call this active icons again, so we know the difference. Public sprite enemy icon B, we call it inactive icons. So file, save all, and then back in Unity we'll have this update again. So now, if correct, yeah, this should work. Okay, so yeah, back into the canvas, and then we drag our drag everything over basically. So we've got our icons, and then we've got our B, which goes in there. And then what we need to do is update these icons here with the right image. So if we just drag that in here like so, and then we should start with 3 lights. And then, assuming everything has gone correctly, when we press P, the player loses a life, as we know, because we've already tested that. And when we press E, and it's not working. Amazing. So what have we done wrong? Okay. So enemy lost life. We know it's getting that far because obviously you can see in the console here that every time it's pressed it comes up enemy lost a life, basically. Here. Perks of copy and pasting. So enemy current lives. There we go. So assuming there's no more mistakes like that, I'll try again. There we go. Oh, there's a wrong image there. Awesome. So, This is in the code again. This is why you shouldn't copy and paste, because otherwise it's just going to go disastrous. So this needs to be enemy. And then save all. And then was that even going the right way? I think it was. So again, that's your P's and that's your E's. And there we go, bottom left hand corner, your enemy game, end game, enemy is out of lives. So then if you press P, the same thing's going to happen, but by which point you should have ended the game already. So yeah, in short, that is pretty much it. Assuming you have the variables for managing, well, actually I've just realized I've contradicted myself. I said originally that you should have some sort of manager for your game, if you like. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run through that real quick. So in your scripts, if you create a another script now, call it, let's say, game manager script, and what we'll do is we'll just create an empty over here and call it your game manager. And up here, game manager, and then just drag your game manager into that and then edit it, because we've pretty much done all the code already, so it doesn't make too much of a difference. But what we want to do in short is in update we want to have this code here, and that will allow us to basically manage the lives and so on. So again, up here then we'll take the lives of our players and put that in here and delete them from here, and do the same with the enemy and put them just lower down, and we'll take everything in the start script and plonk those in there. And then, so obviously we delete this now, we don't need that anymore, we don't need that anymore. And player lost life. Okay, so again, we don't even need to worry about that because we know what happens when the player loses a life. What we need to do is get the user interface to get the information and update it. So in short, what we're going to do is yeah, we're going to have another function, call it public int get current enemy lives, return enemy current lives, and do the exact same thing for the player, public int get current player lives, return current player lives. Oh, that's wrong. Player current lives, there we go. Again, we don't need this function anymore, and get rid of that. And we don't need this one anymore, so we can get rid of that. And yeah, that's pretty cool. So save that. And then over here, we basically want to get rid of this, because again, the user interface shouldn't be doing this. That's kind of wrong in the first place. And then this, although works, it's kind of weird. So what we're doing is in the update, we're just going to do, no, not even worth doing that. So what we're going to do is just call it, change that to check, check, and delete the lost bit. So check player life, check lost life. So now every second what we're going to do is do check player life, what's going on? We don't need that. There we go. And then player current lives, we're going to change that in a second, but we'll change this one to check enemy life. Now in the update function, and this gets called once per frame, so this will get called once per frame too. It'll kind of cascade through all your code. So we can delete this start thing, we don't need that anymore. And then what we're going to do is actually undo that, sorry. What we'll do is in here do public game object. Actually, don't even need to do that. Game object GM. That'll do. And then what we can do is GM equals game object dot find game manager. In fact, what we can do is change this to game manager script dot get component game manager. This just allows us to reduce on how much code we're writing later on. You'll see why, and then I'll kind of run through it real quick. So in here, we can just do gm dot get, I forgot what we even called it now, get current enemy lives. Current enemy lives. That's wrong. We need to call that player. There we go. So now, basically what we can do is copy this and paste that here and here. Put that bracket back in. So now instead of it, let's say if we were to write it in long terms, like let's say we'd have to write this every single time and put get current player lives at the end of that. So then by the time you've got around to writing it, you've written, I know it sounds daft, but you've written, let's say, another 50, 60 characters more than you need to for every single line of code. But because we've already defined what game manager script is, and then we've assigned it to that script, we know exactly where to look because we've called our game manager. And then in here, we could just do that, which will basically say GM, which is this in a sense, get the current player lives. It's pretty much as straightforward as that. And then in here, if we do the exact same thing, but obviously now with gm.get enemy, there we go. And then we can copy this and paste that and paste that too. And that now will basically allow you to reference this script where everything will get managed, everything's a bit more private, it's kept safe sort of thing, away from the user interface, but the user interface will always read from the game manager, and whenever it needs to know something, it will check the game manager, except the game manager will manage, let's say, the ins and outs of the player dying and so on. So if we save all that, nothing should have changed really, everything should run exactly the same, I think. If we check the inspector and play, so that's when I press P, and when I press E, everything works fine. And then the next time you press P and E, the end game, player out of lives, and press E, end game, enemy out of lives. And then in a sense, what you could do then is that when the time ends, we know, you know, you've got the timer here. In theory, you could potentially move this code too into the game manager. In fact, it might even be worth doing that. But then when the game ends, you can potentially have a function like public void end this game, and then you can do a check, something like if player current lives, get player current lives is greater than get current enemy lives, then print player wins, else, actually you might want to do an else if here, else if get current player lives is less than get current enemy lives, print enemy wins, because there is a chance that if the time runs out there will be a draw, so print, let's say draw. Now what's happened? There we go. So we're missing a bracket here now. So for that one. So now basically scrap that. We don't need to know anymore. We don't need to know this anymore. So end this game. End this game. And then over in our time script, we know what to reference, so we can do game object dot find game manager dot get component again. So it's going to be game manager script dot end this game. File save all. So if we just run through this really quickly, if we go to the timer and we can set the time to 10 seconds, and we play. We should then see when the time runs out, it should come up saying it's a draw, because that's the only result you can have. It's a draw because we haven't done anything. So if you press play again, and then this time I'll press E, so enemy has lost a life. Player wins this time, because obviously it has done the check. And now finally, if I do the exact same thing, except this time I'll press P 3 times, and then that's the fourth one, enemy wins. That's before the time even runs out. And that pretty much covers everything. There's no real scenario where this user interface won't work for what you need. It pretty much covers all the bases. So I hope this helps, and if you've got any questions, just get in touch.